On September 21, 1996, the town held its annual festival, an event everyone looked forward to. That morning, Danielle decided to spend a few hours walking along the Riverside Trail before meeting friends in the evening. She left home at 11:30 a.m., carrying a water bottle and her mother's watch, promising to return by 2 p.m. But Danielle's mother began to worry when the clock struck 2 p.m. without a trace of her. She drove with a friend to the trail where Danielle often went. They found her white pickup truck in the parking lot and the doors unlocked. Strangely, they found her car keys and water bottle lying around on the ground near the river. Everything seemed to freeze at that moment. She called out her daughter's name, hoping to hear a response, but there was only an eerie silence. When she found no trace of Danielle, she rushed to the police station to file a report. Her first thought was that her daughter might have had an accident, slipped in the river, or gotten hurt somewhere on the trail. But what happened next was beyond anyone's expectations. On a beautiful day in late September, a peaceful small town immersed in a festive atmosphere suddenly witnessed an event that shook the whole community. Danielle Houchin, a 15-year-old girl, disappeared without a trace while walking by the river. This mystery caused her family pain and lasted for nearly 3 decades before the truth was revealed through a series of surprising discoveries. Danielle was born on November 11, 1980 in Alexandria, Minnesota. Her family moved to Belgrade, Montana, a small town in the heart of nature, in search of a peaceful life. Her parents both worked on the ski patrol, were passionate about outdoor activities, and inspired that in their 3 children. Danielle grew up loving climbing, skiing, and excelling in school. She cherished the dream of becoming a bioengineer with a bright future ahead of her. Police quickly launched a search with the help of residents. Rescue teams scoured the area from the riverbank to the surrounding woods, using dogs and helicopters. But no trace of Danielle was found. Questions began to arise. Had she been kidnapped? Or had someone in the shadows been following her all along? Danielle's disappearance haunted the entire town of Belgrade. Her family was devastated, while the community continued to pressure the police to find the truth. Theories kept coming, but no clues were strong enough to solve the mystery. Nearly 3 decades later, on a seemingly ordinary day, a team of detectives stumbled upon a detail that would change the entire case. While going through old evidence, they found a forgotten piece of evidence, a small silver bracelet engraved with the name Danielle. The bracelet was found about 15 kilometers from the trail, an unlikely place. Following the clue, the police expanded the search area. They found a small cave hidden deep in the mountains, which showed signs of having been used as a hideout. A time-worn piece of paper with scrawled words, like a cry for help, suggested that Danielle might have been held there. But who did this, and why? The story became a hot topic in the media, giving Danielle's family a last hope. The investigation continues, determined to bring this secret to light. As night fell, the bitter cold began to grip the forest. The search party was forced to stop due to the harsh weather conditions, promising to continue the following morning. But Danielle's family refused to give up despite the cold and fatigue. They continued scouring the trail with friends and locals, determined to find her, even if there was only a glimmer of hope. One of the search parties, a man and his 2 sons, close friends of Danielle's sister, decided to go deeper into the woods near the river. The weak beams of flashlights filtered through the dense canopy, creating a tense and mysterious atmosphere. They suddenly noticed something unusual in the dark water as they approached an area a few hundred yards from the parking lot. Their hearts beat faster as the flashlight beams illuminated it. In the shaky light, they recognized the tragic image. Danielle's body lying at the water's edge, just a few feet from the shore. Horrified and devastated, the man knew immediately that she was dead. He rushed back to his car, intending to drive straight to the police station. But on the way, he happened to meet Danielle's father, who was helping with the search. Breaking the news to the grieving father was one of the most challenging moments he had ever had to endure. Police immediately cordoned off the scene to conduct an investigation. Danielle's body was handed over to forensic experts for an autopsy to determine the cause of death. Meanwhile, the police chief quickly made an initial assessment. It appeared to be an accident. There were no signs of foul play, no injuries, no signs of a struggle, and no evidence of the presence of strangers. The hypothesis was that Danielle may have slipped and fallen into the river, where the cold temperatures and strong currents quickly claimed her life. However, the family and the community did not accept this explanation. They raised a series of questions. Why did a careful girl like Danielle fall into the river? How did no one hear her cries for help? And was there something the police missed? Danielle's death has left a void in the hearts of her family and the small community of Belgrade. They are not only grieving the loss, but also tormented by unanswered questions. Could a darker truth lie beneath the surface of a seemingly simple death? As news of the case spreads, many are beginning to question the competence of the police in their investigation. Forensic experts are trying to decipher the answers from Danielle's body. But what if they can't find the real cause? More than ever, the story is beginning to take a turn for the dark and unsettling. When news of Danielle's death broke, her family was devastated and bewildered. They could not believe that a girl who had grown up in the outdoors could have been involved in an accident on a trail she knew like the back of her hand. How could Danielle, a careful and experienced person, drown in such shallow water? This was a question that troubled her parents. However, the sheriff stuck to his original version. It was an accident. He insisted that there was no evidence of foul play and that the case would not be investigated further. But when the autopsy report was released, everything changed. The medical examiner made a discovery that shocked Danielle's family and the town. She had multiple abrasions and bruises on her body, clear signs of a struggle. Experts said it was unlikely to have been the result of an accident. In particular, they noted that Danielle's underwear had been pulled down and that it contained a biological sample from an unknown man. These findings led them to a heartbreaking conclusion. Danielle had been brutally attacked before she died. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, but the most chilling thing was the evidence that someone had deliberately held her underwater. The watch Danielle had been wearing, which should have been on her wrist, was found near her elbow, suggesting that her attacker had pulled her arm as she was dragged toward the river. Experts said this explained the water running down her arm in her final moments. Such clear evidence led Danielle's family and many in the town to believe that the death was a homicide. Yet, for some reason, the medical examiner still listed the manner of death as undetermined. This kept the sheriff from further investigating, leading to outrage in the community. Who was the attacker? Why did he target Danielle? These questions weighed heavily on her family. With clear signs of violence, they could not understand why the police were reluctant to treat the case as a homicide. Danielle, a promising young woman, died under mysterious and painful circumstances. Her story remains a wound that will never heal for those who loved her, and a reminder that the truth is sometimes obscured by what is not revealed. Despite the medical examiner's findings, they listed Danielle's cause of death as undetermined. This prompted the sheriff to decline a full investigation, claiming that there was not enough evidence to prove it was a homicide. However, the evidence mounted. Scratches, bruises consistent with defensive wounds, pulled down underwear, and a biological sample from an unknown male all pointed to Danielle having been sexually assaulted. Forensic experts also found 4 hairs, identified as arm hairs from an unidentified male, on her clothing. The DNA extracted was only partial, and at the time, the FBI's national DNA database was not yet complete enough to support the comparison. In a last-ditch effort, police returned to the scene and found a man's shoe print near where Danielle's body was found. However, they could not determine whether it was related to the case. Officers interviewed several potential suspects but could not link anyone to the crime. Evidence such as hair and shoe prints did not form a solid suspect profile. What is remarkable is that many details of the case were kept secret, not only from the public but also from Danielle's family. For years, her parents had no idea that their daughter had been sexually assaulted. When the truth was revealed, they were heartbroken and angry that the police had not taken the truth seriously from the beginning. The sheriff, who had previously declared the case an accident, later changed his mind, saying he had always believed Danielle was murdered. However, this statement was in direct contradiction to what he had previously told local newspapers when he said there was not enough evidence to classify the case as a homicide. This inconsistency only added to the frustration of Danielle's family and the community. While the chief stood his ground, some younger officers were skeptical. Among them was Cindy Botek, a detective who had joined the department just days before the murder. Cindy believed it was a clear case of murder. However, she could not conduct a full investigation without authority and support from her superiors. Cindy had a theory. The killer could have been someone Danielle knew, a neighbor or friend. However, Danielle's parents could not think of anyone who would have a motive for harming their daughter. Danielle was known as a sociable girl who had no enemies or conflicts with anyone in the small town. In the months following Danielle's death, little progress was made in the case. While police continued to question and examine suspects, the chief's reluctance to classify the case as a homicide hampered any further investigation. Officers like Cindy felt confused and helpless. To them, the evidence was overwhelming that Danielle had been attacked and that the perpetrator might still be living in their community. Several years after the case, police entered a partial DNA sample into the FBI's national database, but no matches were found. Forensic technology was limited at the time, and this left the case at a standstill. Years later, Danielle's family learned more details about the case, including that she had been sexually assaulted. This only added to their anger at the police chief, who had not initially treated the case as a murder. Danielle's parents clearly remember him telling them that their daughter's death was an accident, which was the exact opposite of what he later claimed. The lack of transparency, the inconsistencies in his statements, and the slowness of the police have made Danielle's case one of the biggest mysteries in Belgrade. For her family, the pain comes not only from losing a loved one, but also from the fact that the truth remains buried in the dark. Danielle's family has never stopped fighting for justice. Although the police chief refused to open a full investigation at the time, they have always believed he was trying to avoid responsibility. The community understands that if the case had been adequately investigated from the beginning, the killer could have been caught and brought to justice. But as time has passed, the trail has gone cold, making it increasingly difficult to find the truth. Danielle's parents kept calling for the investigation to be reopened, but each time they tried, hope faded as all efforts came to a dead end. Eventually, Danielle's sister took over the fight. She gave media interviews, contacted investigators, and did everything she could to ensure that her sister's killer would one day be brought to justice. In 2019, 23 years after Danielle's death, the family finally succeeded in getting the case reopened. However, the results were not as expected. The FBI's DNA database did not produce any matches. Retesting old suspects also yielded no breakthroughs, leaving the case at a standstill. In 2021, a new police chief took over the local police department. He had joined the force shortly before Danielle's death and had long been haunted by the case. He had always believed it was a murder, and now, with authority in his hands, he was determined to conduct a full investigation. But after many years, the clues were almost gone. The only evidence he had was a partial DNA sample from the suspect. Realizing that the case needed a new approach, he hired two outside experts. One was a former investigator from California who was now a private investigator, and the other was a DNA analyst with top experience in the field. Together, the two experts focused on identifying the DNA and hair found on Danielle's underwear. They sent the samples to a state-of-the-art California laboratory with the most advanced DNA analysis tools. While waiting for the results, the sheriff continued to push forward with the investigation, determined not to miss a single detail. In August 2023, Danielle's case was officially reclassified as a homicide after nearly 27 years of being frozen. This was a significant turning point, bringing new hope to her family and sending a message that justice had not been forgotten. In early 2024, experts from the California lab contacted the investigation team. While they could not identify the exact owner of the DNA sample, they had made a significant step forward. They had extracted a complete DNA profile from the sample. This was a considerable breakthrough, opening up the possibility of tracing DNA using genetic genealogy. The completed DNA sample was then sent to another Virginia lab specializing in using genetic genealogy to trace DNA back to its origin. This method has helped solve many seemingly unsolved cases, and the investigation team hoped it would also provide answers to Danielle's case. After nearly 3 decades, the case of Danielle Houchin remains one of Belgrade's greatest mysteries. While clues remain elusive, the determination of the new police chief, the support of modern technology, and the relentless efforts of her family are slowly bringing the truth closer. Will genetic genealogy identify the killer? And will justice be served after nearly 30 years of waiting? Time will tell. But one thing is sure. Danielle's family, with their love and firm faith, will never give up the search for the truth. Nearly 28 years after Danielle Houchin's tragic death, her family finally got the answers they'd been waiting for. But the story's ending was unexpected. It left everyone involved with mixed emotions. After sending the suspect's DNA sample to a Virginia lab, investigators uploaded the DNA profile to a public genetic database where people voluntarily share their DNA to find relatives. In a rare event, they found a perfect match right away. The owner of the DNA was Paul Hutchinson, 55, who lived in the small town of Dillon, about 100 miles from where Danielle was killed. When investigators looked into Paul, they discovered that at the time of the murder, Paul was a biology student at the University of Montana, just 12 miles from Belgrade. After graduating, Paul worked for the Montana Bureau of Land Management, married, and had 2 children. He had no criminal record, not even a minor fine, keeping him off the suspects list. On July 23, 2024, detectives questioned him at Paul's workplace. When they approached him outside the office, Paul appeared highly nervous when invited to the police station. In the interrogation room, he initially remained calm, but when he was shown a photo of Danielle, his expression changed immediately. He began to sweat, tremble, and lose control of his actions. To experienced detectives, this reaction was almost a silent admission of guilt. However, Paul still denied any involvement in Danielle's death. The police took a DNA sample directly from him and released him, as there was not enough evidence to make an arrest. But just hours after the interrogation, Danielle's family received news from the detectives. They had found Danielle's killer. The next day, as police waited for DNA results to confirm, they received a surprise call from Paul himself. In the brief call, Paul said he needed help and gave his location before hanging up. When police arrived at the scene, they found Paul dead in his car with a gun next to him. There was no suicide note, but Paul's motive seemed clear. He realized he could not escape justice and chose to end his life rather than face the consequences. The news shocked Paul's family, friends, and colleagues. None of them knew what he had done nearly 30 years ago, and all only learned about the charges when they learned of his death. In August 2024, the police held an official press conference. Paul's DNA matched the samples found on Danielle's body. The police believed it was a crime of opportunity. There was no evidence that Paul and Danielle had ever known each other. Most likely, Paul had encountered Danielle on the trail that fateful day, and he decided to attack her. After killing Danielle, he attempted to cover up the crime by making it look like an accident. Danielle's family admits that learning that Paul is dead is more of a relief than a disappointment. While he is not facing prison, they feel that at least some justice has been served. However, what pains them the most is that the case could have been solved decades ago if the sheriff had taken it more seriously at the time. If that had happened, Paul would not have had nearly 30 years of freedom to raise a family and enjoy life. Instead, justice for Danielle has been delayed for far too long, leaving her family with lasting pain. Paul's wife later offered her condolences to Danielle's family, admitting that she knew nothing about her husband's actions and did not excuse his crimes. Danielle Houchin's story is more than just a case. It is a reminder of the importance of accountability and transparency in investigations. Justice, albeit belated, has been served, but the pain and loss her family has endured will never be erased. What do you think of the outcome of this story? Is belated justice enough to make up for the long years of waiting? Share your thoughts.